Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured, but the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. A significant portion of Michel de Montaigne's essay on affectionate relationships, de l'amitié, is devoted to talking about friendship, particularly his own very deep friendship, which provides sort of a model with La Boétie, a very, very close, intimate friend of his who unfortunately he loses by the time that he's writing this essay. And Montaigne is going to make an important distinction between, let's call it, two different spheres of friendship. There is this elevated, very, lucky if we get it in our life kind of deep friendship that is possible, that he enjoyed. And then there's the common range of friendships. And in saying this, he's following along with many other authors, Aristotle, for example, Cicero, Plutarch, Seneca, and so many others as well. And he's going to distinguish between these in a number of ways. So let's look at the common type of friendship first. So it figures into the set of relationships that have some other purpose, an end, and also fruit, the outcome, the thing that we're looking for, than the friendship itself. And so if we think about Aristotle's famous distinction between three different sorts of friendship, where we have friendships of usefulness, where we're getting something from the other person that's not directly pleasurable, friendships of pleasure, where we enjoy each other's company, we participate in activities that are mutually enjoyable, or we derive pleasure from the person, perhaps from their good sense of humor. Those are looking for something other than the friendship itself, or the welfare of the friend, the being well, their doing well in life, we could say, right? We could go on and on and on. You're probably familiar with this distinction, whereas in the highest form of friendship, we love the friend for their own sake, or we feel friendship towards them for their own sake. We desire the good for them, not just because we're getting something out of them, but for their own sake. In all cases, we do feel affection, but it's a much greater, intenser affection in the higher form. So it's the other thing that you're getting out of it. And we could look at many different examples that he has. He talks a little bit later in there about acquaintances and familiar relationships. He says that what we normally call friends and friendships are just that. It's people that we have spent some time with, people that we've gotten used to, but we could do without if we had to. We could replace. And he does tell us that in these sorts of relationships, the souls, the people's personalities do in fact support each other, right? It says that we're bound by some chance or some suitability, and it's by that very means that we support each other. So we go to school with somebody, we're in classes, we commiserate about how bad this exam is, we go through various, romances and breakups and console each other about that. But it could be somebody else. It could be a different person, a different classmate, even somebody that we didn't go to school with. And that's okay. He's not saying that we should leave all of those behind, he does tell us when he's considering what do we do if a friend is going wrong, that we do have to be a little bit reserved or careful about these. He says, let nobody place those other common friendships in the same rank as this. I know about them, the most perfect of their kind as well as anyone else, but I would advise you not to confound their rules. You would deceive yourself. In those other friendships, you must proceed with wisdom and caution, keeping the reins in your hands. The bond is not so well tied. There is no reason to doubt it. Love a friend, said Kilio, as though someday you must hate him. Hate him as though you must love him. And he says, in the better form of friendship, that's stupid advice. Don't love like that. You need to be able to give yourself entirely. But with other lesser kinds of friendship, it's actually a good idea. He says that precept, which is so detestable, hateable, in that sovereign master friendship is salutary, healthy, in the practice of friendships which are common and customary, in relation to which you must employ that saying which Aristotle often repeated, oh, my friends, there is no friend. So if we're thinking about the highest form, that's hard to come by, but we've got plenty of lower forms of friendship as well. And he talks about sharing these common friendships. He says, in one friend, you can love beauty, in another, affability, getting along with people, in another, generosity, in another, a fatherly affection, in another, a brotherly love, and so on, right? So we can have a vast variety of different friends, and they can actually be friends with each other too, for similar reasons. A little bit later, he's going to expand that idea and talk about other kinds of relations that we have. He says, in those alliances which only get hold of us by one hand, we need simply to provide against such flaws as specifically affect that end. So what are we trying to get from the other person? He says, I don't care what the religion of my doctor or lawyer is. That consideration has nothing in common with the friendly services which they owe to me. So I can be friends with my doctor or lawyer. I don't need to be great friends with them. I want them to take care of my body or take care of my legal affairs, right? In such commerce as arises at home with my servants, I act the same way, he says. I make few inquiries about the chastity of my footman. I don't care if my footman is actually screwing around, having sex with other people. Hey, so long as it doesn't affect his job and his duties, I'm cool with that. I want to know if he's hardworking. He says, I'm less concerned by a mule driver who gambles than by one who's an idiot, or a cook who swears than by one who is incompetent. It's not my concern to tell the world how to behave, but how I behave in it. And so he says, for the intimate companionship of my table, I choose the agreeable, not the wise. In my bed, beauty comes before virtue. In social conversation, ability even without integrity, and so on. So, in these common relationships, we don't need them to be everything to us. We just need them to deliver what it is that we're looking for, and for us to similarly do that with them. But what about full friendship? Well, this is different. This is something much, much higher, also much more rare. He's going to talk about it's a case where our wills work together, a convenance de volonté, right? So volonté is the will, and the deepest part of ourself, the part that chooses, the part that values, the part that prioritizes, they have to work together. They have to come together. But it's more than that. It's not just a harmony, a consonance, a lack of disagreement. He talks about, in the case of him and his very deep friend La Boétie, that what we have going on is a capturing each other's wills, plunging into the other, losing oneself in the other. And he says that happened to both of us. He says, here we go. There is no one particular consideration in friendship, not two or three nor four nor 1,000 of them, but rather some inexplicable quintessence of them all mixed up together, which having captured my will, brought it to plunge into his will, and lose itself, and which having captured his will, brought it to plunge and lose itself in mine with an equal hunger and emulation. And then he says, I say lose itself in very truth. We kept nothing back for ourselves. Nothing was his or mine. Now, this is a tough thing to live up to, right? And how often is this going to happen? Some people may never enjoy this. Some people may have it only once in their life. When he's considering whether you should go along with a friend who, suggests that you should do something bad, he's actually going to say something else quite interesting about that. He says, if my friend had asked me to do these things, I would in fact do them, even though they're not the right thing to do. But my friend wouldn't ask me for that, right? So you know the other's mind, as he's going to say, just as well as your own. And so you can trust them, right? You know what it is that they will ask you about. You understand them as a moral being. Going on, he talks about losing awareness of the services and good turns which foster these other kinds of friendship. They're not taken into account. Why? Because we go back to this, the total interfusion of our wills. So he says, I feel no gratitude for any good turn I do to myself. So too the union of such friends, being truly perfect, leads them to lose any awareness of such services, to hate, and to drive out from between them all terms of division and difference. And what would produce that? So he says, here's examples: good turn, duty, gratitude, request, thanks, and the like. Everything is genuinely common to them both. Their wills, goods, wives, children, honors, and lives, their correspondence is that of one soul in two bodies, according to that most apt definition of Aristotle, which we see talked about a lot in ancient philosophy, in Cicero, again in Plutarch, and in others. So this is pretty deep, right? It's not just, well, you got two people and they know each other really well. They are somehow connected on the level of souls. He raises an interesting issue. If this is so good, well, what if you had 3 friends like that? What if you had 4? And he says, well, that's not likely to happen, right? He says that, to begin with, the unique highest friendship loosens other bonds. You get close to the other person, and he says, if anyone suggests I can love each of 2 friends as much as the other, and they can love each other and love me as much as I love them, he's turning into a plural, into a confraternity, that which is the most one, the most bound into one. And he says, one single example of it is moreover the rarest thing to find in the world. So he's not saying it can't happen. He's saying that's pretty unlikely to happen. Where are you actually going to find that? The last thing that we have to talk about is this relationship that Montaigne himself has with, and continues after death, with his great friend La Boétie, right? And he's going to talk about the two of them finding each other in their, mature years, right? His friend writes a piece, and he, wants to find him. La Boétie also wants to seek out Montaigne. And what happens when they find each other? Well, they latch on to each other. They become great, great friends with each other. And he's going to tell us that there's a kind of result of this. So this is very interesting. For somebody who spends so much time with the ancients, he says, the ancients talk about friendship, but it doesn't actually come across as much as my experience does. He says here, I don't expect to find anyone to be a good judge of this. The very writings which antiquity have left us on this subject, again, Aristotle, Cicero, Plutarch, others, seem weak to me compared to what I feel. In this case, the precepts of philosophy are surpassed by the results. And he says, in antiquity, Menander promised a man happy if he'd merely encountered the shadow of a friend. He was certainly right to say so, especially if he'd tasted friendship. For in truth, I compare all the rest of my life. By the grace of God, I've lived it as sweetly and easily, exempt save for the death of such a friend from grievous affliction and full tranquility of mind, contenting myself with natural endowments. If I compare it, I say, to those 4 years when it was granted to me to enjoy in the sweet companionship and fellowship of a man like that, all the rest of my life is smoke and ashes, a night dark and dreary. This is as good as it possibly gets, right? And then he says, this is what can happen to you when your friend dies. He says, I was already so used and accustomed to being in everything one of two. Now I feel I am no more than half. He's missing the other half of his soul. And then he goes on further and says, there is no deed, no thought in which I do not miss him, as he would have missed me. For just as he infinitely surpassed me in ability and virtue, so did he in the offices of friendship. And that's a fitting place to close this particular essay, isn't it? Thinking about the wonderful friendship that he's lost. And notice what he doesn't say here. He doesn't say, it's such a grievous wound, I wish I'd never been friends with him. No, he enjoyed one of the best things you could possibly have, a truly deep, abiding friendship, which inevitably, like all things dealing with our mortal frames, ends in death, though he can still remember and appreciate and also miss his great friend.